There we go, and we should be live now. So let's go ahead and get started. Hi guys, I'm Dungeon Master Mark, and for those of you who don't go on InWorld very often, they have a forum section where people tend to ask sometimes some really strange questions. Sometimes they'll post like insights about their game stores. I apologize. I have an English bulldog that evidently likes to make noise or snore whenever I start a video. But there was a gentleman who owns a game store who posted on InWorld today that he asked one of those questions of, is Pathfinder, like the game system itself, dead, or is it in its twilight? Which I thought that was a really kind of interesting question. I myself GM a lot of Pathfinder games. I do occasionally do 5th edition. I occasionally do some Savage Worlds, some other game systems, and even my own kind of spliced together system that I sometimes run for friends and family. And then some of the light box, like beginner box games we sometimes do also. So when I started reading the comments, his comment was, or his statement was, he owns a game store. In their store, Pathfinder has just done ridiculously awesome for like the last 5-6 years, and in the last year or so it's died off a lot. And then you have people who come on there and go, Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, that's it's the future, Pathfinder's dead. And then you have people who say, Pathfinder's fine, 5th edition is going to die anytime now. And I think it's really kind of ironic you have these mixed views. Some of it's, the whole edition war thing, which by this time you think people will be over this crap, right? But when the truth really comes down to it, I read the article, and then one of my friends and I were talking on Facebook, and I said basically the same thing. I think that Pathfinder is at a place right now where they have tons of people who have bought their content, like their core rulebook, and I don't think there's as much of a incentive for people who already own the core rulebook and bestiary and stuff just to keep buying core rulebooks. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm not going to buy a second, third, and fourth copy of the core rulebook from Pathfinder. That's kind of silly. Now, Pathfinder has done a couple things recently. When I say Pathfinder, of course, I mean Paizo, which was they came out with the Pocket Edition, which the Pocket Edition has basically the GM book and the core rulebook all in a much smaller, compact size. So if you're out traveling, it's something that's a lot easier for you to basically stuff that in your bag and, go to your game. Now, they are going to be coming out with the Pocket Edition, bestiary, and a bunch of other stuff like that. So they are kind of rehashing some of those old books, which it was something that people have been asking for a while. You also have the horror adventures, which is kind of reminiscent of the old Ravenloft, where you have the horror rules, which I just recently did a review on that. Which I see we now have another person who's joining the live stream there. One of the other kind of interesting things is Pathfinder's, the way they put out books is a little bit different than the way Wizards of the Coast has traditionally. Wizards of the Coast, in the past, they had this, or I shouldn't say have, it still to this day, obviously 4th edition, 3rd edition, 5th edition has kind of reached that same model where they'll have a system for like 5 or 6 years, sometimes a little longer than that, and they'll keep putting out supplements for it. And then they basically kind of kill off that edition, come out with a new edition. Pathfinder obviously has already went well beyond that point. They've stated a couple times that they're not going to be coming out with Pathfinder 2nd edition. It doesn't look like they're going to be doing that anytime soon. But they are very good about putting out splat books, adding more bestiaries, adding more content, and lots of adventure paths. And I think Wizards of the Coast has kind of learned a little bit from seeing how Pathfinder puts out content, and I think they're trying to adjust to that. I don't want to say like business model, but in some ways it is kind of a business model. Wizards of the Coast, obviously with 4th edition, they struggled. They lost a lot of ground to Paizo, to Pathfinder. So when Paizo decided to pick up, the Pathfinder game system, basically the open, 3.5. They changed a couple of things. They came out with their adventure paths, which was hugely successful. They basically picked up where the Dungeon and Dragon magazine left off and ran with it, and they've made a lot of money. One thing they've done the last couple of years is they've kind of branched out. They now have the Pathfinder adventure card game. They have some board games like the Kill Dr. Lucky, which they've basically kind of bought from like independent little, like mom and pop operations, and took those over and been producing those. Now they're coming out with Starfinder, so they're branching out a little bit more than what they were initially kind of modeled to. So I think that some of their business model has kind of changed from being just about the Pathfinder game system, and they're kind of trying to branch out. For those of you who don't know, say Pathfinder did try doing an MMO, the Pathfinder Online, which it looks like that is probably a complete failure now, and there was a Kickstarter. So like I said, it is possible it might be picked up at some other point by a producer and be bought out and then picked back up. But they also have the Pathfinder Society, the organized play, which is fairly successful. It's a lot different than the Dungeons & Dragons Adventure League, which a lot of people complain about. So whereas Dungeons & Dragons or Wizards of the Coast seems to be primarily working just on one project, just on producing new content, and just for the Dungeons & Dragons itself, Paizo at the same time, they're still making stuff for the Pathfinder game system. They're working on Starfinder, they're working on the adventure card game, and other projects. They also have like their video project, or not video, the audio projects where they're putting out like soundtracks. So I think it's hard for me to say that Pathfinder is in its twilight because there's a lot of stuff they're working on. I do think they're not putting out content as quickly for the Pathfinder game system, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Wizards of the Coast, like I said, Wizards of the Coast has this track system of just putting out content after content after content and content, and then they just kill it. One thing Paizo does really, really well is, like I said, they have an adventure path that comes out a couple times a year, like a brand new adventure path. Like I said, I believe the one they have now is the Strange Eons or Aeons that's getting ready to come out. And then there's supposed to be a horror-related one soon after that. And then when it comes to miniatures, obviously Pathfinder and Wizards of the Coast are both putting out miniature lines as well. So I don't think you have to worry about Pathfinder being at the end of its ropes, because I think you would see them pulling back a lot of those projects. Pardon me. In the same way with Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, I don't think either of those companies at this point, are throwing in the towel or quitting or anything like that. So I think when you see these posts where people post something like, is Pathfinder dead, or is Wizards of the Coast, about to tank or about to fail, it really all comes down to fear mongering. People who want to just keep, pushing this whole, edition war. And when it really comes down to it, whether you play Pathfinder, whether you play Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, they're basically the same game. It's all based off the original Dungeons & Dragons. If you play Pathfinder, you can play 5th edition. If you play 5th edition, you can play Pathfinder. Unless you have some type of learning disability and you have trouble with numbers, there's nothing keeping you from playing either system. Granted, Pathfinder is a little bit more of a crunchy game system. You have a little bit more rules and there's a little bit more math involved. Some people like that, some people don't like that. So that's all kind of a matter of perspective. On the same hand, if you like theater of the mind games, where you don't like a tactical system, 5th edition may be more geared towards you, due to the fact that a lot of those optional rules you just don't have to use. And then at the same time, like I said, those rules are optional. You don't have to use, flanking. You don't have to use a lot of those rules that make Pathfinder more crunchy. One thing Gary Gygax used to always say that you can change the rules, you can change stuff around however you see fit. You're the GM. You can change whatever you want. So it's kind of silly anytime someone blames a game system saying that it's the game system's fault that their players don't like the system or they don't like the rules, because as the GM, it's kind of your job to change the game to suit your players. But that is about it for this video, guys. If you guys have any other questions, if you guys want to see a video on anything else, please let me know. And we will catch you guys on the other side. Bye-bye.